Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, the place to come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker and welcome to episode 279, Who Owns What? How Boundaries Create Real Trust and Emotional Safety. Well, welcome back as we finish out this month, which has been all about being and connecting in ways that are good for us and show healthy boundaries. So we're going to continue our focus on what healthy boundaries really look like in our behavior and our communication this week, like what we should do and not do in our relationships. You know I talk about boundaries all the time on the show, and mainly because I don't think we can have confidence or have healthy relationships without them. To me, no boundaries means no trust. No trust, no emotional safety. And when we don't have emotional safety in a relationship, the other things tend to fall apart over time. So today I want to finish out this month with reminders of just how boundaries make it safe and why. Now, boundary work is a big paradigm, like you often hear me say, and I think it takes time and commitment and the kind of work that we just can't do alone. So if you need some help with that, don't try to muddle through all by yourself. Look in the show notes. I have a free boundaries ebook, which has little mini podcasts and worksheets and things to get you started and really get you thinking. And then if you need a power hour with me, just to sit there, you can do just one or two if that's what you want to do. And we can figure out what's going on and where you should get started. There's 2 other courses in there. Check them out. The courses that I design are from the years of experience working with this stuff and recognizing where people struggle the most and what helps them the most, and where I see sustained change years later. So that's why I believe in it. Okay, so let's get into it. So have you ever felt responsible for someone else's happiness, even though you know you can't make people happy? Or maybe you've been on the receiving end where someone else tries to control what you think, what you feel, what you choose. So in relationships, those blurred boundaries often masquerade as love, and they're romanticized in our society. We think it means we're deeply connected when we absorb other people's emotions, when we fix each other's problems, or expect our partner to just intuitively know what we need. But real trust, real safety, the kind where you can truly be vulnerable, I think comes when each person owns what's theirs. Their feelings, their thoughts, their choices, their beliefs. It's not about shutting each other out, and it's not about not caring. I think it's about creating a foundation where both of you can show up fully without the fear of being consumed or responsible for the other. So today we're going to get into that. First, what do I mean by who owns what? You know, boundaries aren't really walls necessarily. They're about knowing what belongs to you and what belongs to the other person. Feelings. You own your emotions. No one makes you feel a certain way. You have reactions, but they come from inside of you. Of course, others can trigger them, but they aren't responsible for managing them. Your reactions that come from inside of you are shaped by your experiences, your beliefs, and your past wounds. And others, yes, can trigger these emotions, but you're responsible for soothing them or fixing them, healing them, grieving, whatever you need to do. Does that make sense? So think about it this way. Take you out, put another person in that scenario that happened this week. Would they have responded the same way if they had different struggles in the past, different experiences in the past, different ideas about life and about themselves? So that's a really good exercise to do to help you see what you need to own. Now, it's so easy to say, well, they made me feel guilty or they hurt my feelings. But the truth is, our emotions are just signals. They're really not evidence of someone else's wrongdoing per se. Someone's words or actions might be awful and might trigger our fight or flight. It may activate an old wound or an insecurity that we have. But it really is up to us to explore what's underneath of that reaction and then decide how we want to handle it. This also means that we don't get to hold others emotionally hostage, meaning expecting them to constantly regulate our moods, tiptoe around our triggers, or adjust their truth just to keep us comfortable. Healthy relationships allow space for emotions, but they don't demand emotional caretaking. We don't want eggshells in the relationship. Now, this doesn't mean that they can be as crappy to you as they want to be. There are consequences for them if they do that. It just means that their behavior is their behavior. Our feelings about their behavior are ours to figure out. And our thoughts, right? You get to decide what you believe, just as others have the right to their own perspective. Your thoughts are yours to examine, yours to challenge, and I think yours to refine if you want to. No one can force you to think a certain way, just like you can't force someone else to see things your way. Be nice, wouldn't it? But it doesn't work. Now, it's easy to assume that if someone disagrees with us, one of us has to be wrong. But really, the truth is, differences in perspective don't have to be a threat. They can be an opportunity for growth. It depends. There's a whole continuum of this stuff. But we don't have to adopt someone else's beliefs to respect them either. And they don't have to agree with us in order for us to be worthy of respect. And that's really important. Especially with family of origin stuff or your extended family. They don't have to agree with you to respect that's where you are. And vice versa. This also means, here comes the boundary stuff, guys. We don't have to spend energy convincing, defending, or proving our thoughts to others. In fact, that's us managing outcomes if we do. We are allowed to believe what we believe just as they are. The key is recognizing where our thoughts end and someone else's begin. Because when we try to control or change someone else's mind, we're getting out of our lane and we're trying to control and manage outcomes. We're manipulating, basically. And it's all out of fear. So it's our job to figure out, okay, what is my fear if they don't agree with me? What is my fear if they don't think the same way or see the situation the same way? And here's a big area, choices. You are responsible for your decisions and others are responsible for theirs. I know we know this intellectually, but sometimes we certainly can forget this emotionally. We can influence each other, but we don't get to control. You have the power to choose your actions, your priorities, and your responses, just as they have the same right, even if you don't agree with their choices. Do you see the detachment work that's going on in your mind as you work through this stuff? Now, it is natural to want to influence the people we care about, especially when we see them heading down a path that seems harmful. But influence and control are not the same thing. You can offer guidance, you can share your perspective, and you can set boundaries around how someone's choices affect you, but you can't make their decisions for them. On the flip side, if you find yourself blaming others for your own choices, saying things like, well, I had no choice, or they made me do it, well, it might be a sign that you're avoiding ownership of your own power. No one else can force you to do something against your will. You always have choices, even when they suck, even when they're limited, and even when they're really difficult. Recognizing this takes a lot of emotional maturity, and we don't do it at first. When we fully own our choices, the cool thing is that we stop feeling like a victim. We stop feeling like victims of our own circumstances, and I think we really start stepping into our own agency. And when we allow others to own theirs, We respect their autonomy, whether we like their decisions or not. Remember, what's about them, what's about us. Maybe what's about them are some choices that really freak us out and worry us, but that's what is about us. Our worry, our fear, are valid feelings about their choices, but they're separate. Those are ours. We can't commingle them. Behaviors. You choose how you act, and others choose how they respond. Trying to get someone to behave a certain way is very, very tempting, but it always leads to control issues and resentment. No matter how much someone provokes or pressures or influences you, your actions are still your own. Likewise, no matter how much you want someone to behave differently, their choices belong to them. Now, their choices may have direct and indirect impacts on you. I get it. And that's what you have to process. And that's where you figure out, where do I need to set a boundary? Do I need to detach from this person a little bit more? Do I need to say, hey, I can't do this with you anymore? What do I need to do? It's so easy, though, to fall into the trap of thinking, well, I wouldn't have reacted that way if they hadn't done this. Or if they really cared, they would just behave differently. But the truth is, your actions are always your responsibility. No one else controls your words, your tone, or your reactions. You do. And this is a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people at first. And if this kind of makes you frustrated when listening to this, it's okay. It's normal. You have a lot of company. Our resistance to this just tells us that we have some fear around detaching. And we might have some fear around owning our stuff. Remember, if you grew up in a family that normalized the opposite of everything I'm saying today, there's going to be some work to do to come to terms with it and see that this is a healthier way. There's a lot of resistance along the way, and that's okay. So at the same time, trying to control how someone else acts, whether through guilt or anger or silent expectations, we've talked about this stuff here before, we know inevitably is going to lead to resentment. Remember, people don't change because we demand it. They change because they decide to. And when we try to force behavior instead of setting boundaries, you know what happens. We often end up in a frustrating cycle where neither person feels respected, and they're probably going to dig in their heels and just be worse. They don't change because we demand it. We don't change when other people demand it of us, now do we? Now, we may have demands come at us, and we may have a mini tantrum and cross our arms and pout and stomp our feet for a week. But at the end of the day, what do? We choose, right? We know this. We decide, well, I don't think I want to get fired, or, well, I don't think I want to lose that relationship or pay that fine, right? We are choosing. We are owning. The most empowering shift I think we can make is to focus on what we actually can control, and that is ourselves. So instead of trying to manage their behavior, we can decide what we will and won't tolerate. Remember the boundaries, what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do, what we will and won't engage with, and how we will handle situations that don't align with our values. That is where our real power is now. That's also where all the risk is, right? Which is why we don't want to do all of this. We'd much rather convince them to see our way, honor our feelings, think and believe and feel like us, because it'd be so much easier. But it doesn't work. And then finally, beliefs. Like, you don't have to share the same beliefs to be close to someone, depending on what the beliefs are, I think. I think this is a complicated issue. But respect is far more important than agreement. In any relationship, whether it's romantic, familial, or professional, there's always going to be differences in perspectives. There's going to be some differences in values and personal convictions. The strength of a relationship isn't measured by how much you agree necessarily, but by how well you handle the disagreements. Now, it all depends. We have to decide what values that the other person has that we can or cannot live with. And it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking, well, if they really cared, they'd see things my way. or we have to be on the same page about everything to be truly connected, but that's not necessarily true. You want to have a healthy relationship that allows room for individuality. But again, I think that means internal work for us to decide, okay, here's my list of values. What are some things that I'm not going to bend on? And what are some things that the people in my life need to share? But what are some that, it's not going to be that big of a deal? For instance, what if one of your values is inclusivity or respecting all people, and you feel like that's a big deal if the people in your circle don't care about that or think the opposite, versus maybe one of your values is creativity, but your best friend's not terribly creative or doesn't think that they are, but that doesn't have to end your friendship. You know what I mean? So you have to figure out what's negotiable and what's not, basically. When we try, though, to impose our beliefs on others, or when someone else pressures us to conform, it creates control, resentment, and even dishonesty. True connection isn't built on forcing sameness. It's built on mutual respect and the ability to listen without needing to convince, and allowing people to grow. At the end of the day, your beliefs are yours to explore, yours to refine and stand by, but that doesn't mean they have to be everyone else's. It's good to hold space for different perspectives. The rule of thumb, of course, is you can honor what they value as long as it doesn't make you go against one of your own values. So when you're trying to do the who owns what, these are the categories you kind of want to think about. Feelings, thoughts, choices, behaviors, and beliefs. What's about them? What's about me? What do they believe? What do I believe? What are my feelings about their beliefs? What are my feelings about their behaviors? What are their feelings about my boundaries? So it goes both ways, and it's a lot of mental work, and it's not work that you can do alone. And my point behind that is we got to run this by people, healthy people. You can't just rely on yourself to have a healthy perspective, especially when you're trying to change how you even do relationships. Like, we're going to mess it up if we only do it by ourselves, because guess what? We can just rationalize the crap out of any bad behavior that we have. And when it comes to boundaries, there's a lot of risk and a lot of fear and a lot of old behaviors, maybe things our families taught us. We need accountability and objectivity. We need someone else's eyes on our work in order for us to get healthier. If not, what I've seen is we just kick the can on how long it takes for things to get better. So let's talk about close relationships, because this is where this stuff can, I think, show up the most. First, how do we mistake blurred boundaries for love? We think absorbing each other's emotions is a sign of deep connection, but oftentimes it's actually enmeshment. It might feel like love when we take on someone else's pain as our own, but when we blur the emotional lines, we lose sight of where we end and they begin. True emotional connection means offering, yes, wholehearted support, but it's without merging your identities. You can deeply care about someone's feelings without carrying them as your own. Yes, it may stir up some sadness in you and some anger in you, but you don't make it yours. You remind yourself at the end of the conversation, well, that's their burden. I can love and support them through that, but that's not mine. Doesn't mean we don't care. It just means that we are trying to determine what is ours and what is theirs. The biggest way this can show up is fixing. It's like we think trying to fix someone else's choices means that we care. But it's not caring, it's controlling. Now, it is natural to want to help the people we love. But when we take it upon ourselves to solve their problems or steer their decisions, we're crossing a line. Real love allows people the dignity of their own choices, even when we don't agree with them. Support does not mean taking over. We take over because we're afraid. So the litmus test is, if you have any fear about them, following through, doing the right thing, That's yours. That's not theirs. That's your fear. And that's not a good sign because it means you're getting ready to fix something. Instead, you have to do the grief work around what might be some possible outcomes if they follow through on this thing that they want to do that you don't agree with. Or if they don't follow through on the thing you wish they would. If we're not controlling, we're grieving and we're coming to acceptance. Here's another way this shows up. We think expecting someone to read our mind is proof of a deep bond. And it can happen sometimes. You get to know someone, you get close to them, okay. But a lot of times this can be really unfair. I mean, love doesn't mean someone should instinctively know what we need without us saying it. When we assume that if they really loved me, they would just know, we set ourselves up for disappointment and resentment. Real intimacy comes from clear, honest communication, not silent expectations. But of course, clear, honest communication is emotional honesty and it's vulnerable, which is why we don't do it. Think about it. It'd be so much easier if people just read your mind and you wouldn't have to ask for what you need and put yourself out there, maybe to be disappointed or shamed or laughed at or whatever. We think losing ourselves in a relationship means we love deeply, but if we do it too much, it becomes self-abandonment. When we stop prioritizing our own needs, our own interests, and our own identity in the name of love, we're not deepening any connections. We are dissolving ourselves. In fact, it hurts the connection. I see a lot more conflict when there's a lot of enmeshment in a relationship. Healthy relationships actually thrive when both people remain whole individuals. Love isn't about becoming one person. That is so misunderstood. It's about being two people who choose to be together while maintaining their sense of self. So, boundaries create more emotional safety and trust. They allow both people to show up as themselves, not as someone who's walking on eggshells or shape-shifting to avoid conflict. When boundaries aren't clear, people start adapting themselves to keep the peace. They start suppressing their true feelings. They start holding back what they need. They mold themselves into what they think will be acceptable because they don't want to upset the other person. But this isn't real connection. I think it's performance. And I know that sounds harsh, but guys, that's what it is. When boundaries are clear, both people can be honest, they can be open, and they can be authentic. And there should never be fear of backlash. Knowing that someone owns their own emotions, I think, and this is a big deal, makes it so much safer to share vulnerably because you don't have to fear being blamed or controlled. When we take responsibility for our own emotions instead of expecting others to manage them, aka acting out, having a tantrum, relationships can become a space for support, not emotional caretaking. Because if you come in the house and you slam stuff down and you are snippy and yelling and acting out without telling people what's going on, then they have to caretake your feelings. You can express your feelings without worrying that the other person will shut down, get defensive, or try to control your reaction. This creates emotional safety where both of you can share openly without the fear, and this is really important, without the fear of being guilted, manipulated, or dismissed. I think trust is built when people feel safe to be honest, without fear of overreaction or manipulation. Because if someone is afraid that being honest will result in anger or punishment or emotional withdrawal, they're going to start hiding their truth, not because they want to, but because it feels safer. Boundaries, I think, can eliminate this fear because they can create clear expectations and emotional responsibility. When both people know that they can express themselves without being met with, extreme reactions or acting out or controlling behavior, I think trust can grow. And that is what deepens the relationship. So today we talked about what makes a relationship feel safe. And that many of us believe that a deep connection means merging our emotions and fixing each other's problems, or maybe intuitively knowing what the other person needs. But what if the very things we think create closeness are actually keeping us stuck in some unhealthy dynamics? So we explored how to recognize what belongs to you in a relationship, like your thoughts, your feelings, your choices, your behaviors, and your beliefs, and what belongs to them, and pulling those things apart, and why understanding this, I think, is foundational for boundary work, which then creates trust, emotional safety, and true intimacy. And then we talked about how blurred boundaries often get mistaken for love, and why boundaries don't push people away. They actually make the relationship stronger. Real connection doesn't come from losing yourself. It comes from knowing where you stand and respecting where they stand. So if this resonated with you today, I want you to take a moment to reflect. Where have you taken on responsibility that isn't yours? And where have you expected someone else to manage something that belongs to you? If you want to work through this with more guidance and support, in my Find Your Voice program, we break down how to set boundaries in a way that strengthens relationships instead of damaging them. Because when you stop carrying what isn't yours, you get to show up as your full, authentic self. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope this episode shed some light on some things that maybe you hadn't looked at, or just reinforced the work that you're doing now. And if you're doing boundary work, be very proud of yourself, because it is life-changing. And remember, if you need some support in this area, click on the Power Hour in the show notes, and I'm right here to help you. Okay, so pay it forward, keep focusing on you, and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you can begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.